Okay, so today I'm attempting to continue through the reading through the Silmarillion and the history of Middle-earth. I kind of stopped posting videos because I just wanted to read through the whole Silmarillion and didn't make anything else. But I kind of got up to the part where the Noldor, like the flight of the Noldor from Valinor to Beleriand. And so I'm picking this up at the same time as reading through the War of the Jewels, which, or the Grey Annals in the War of the Jewels, which is very, very similar. It basically picks up where I left off, essentially, in the Silmarillion. So I'm kind of reading them side by side, because what's happened is I was reading a bunch of this. Well, I'm going to be talking about section 1 to 40 today, which is about the equivalent of the chapter 10 in the Silmarillion called On the Sindar. But as I was reading through this, I was like, oh my gosh, I need to just read the Silmarillion all through again, because I couldn't tell what was new information and what was just stuff that I've forgotten. But yeah, I kind of skipped through the On the Sindar chapter because I was like, well, do we really care about the Sindar? I just want to know about the Noldor. I want to know what happens to Feanor. I want to know what happens to Fingolfin. What I've realized is, now that I've read the whole Silmarillion and just backtracking a little bit, there is like a section in the Annals that I kind of overlooked, and that was all of the themes that were getting sung at the very beginning before Ea was even created. That Melkor was just kind of playing around with like the symbols going like this. Okay, so this is what it is. Then Iluvatar arose, and the Ainur perceived that his countenance was stern, and he lifted up his right hand. Interesting that it's his right hand. And behold, a third theme grew amid the confusion, and it was unlike the others, for it seemed at first soft and sweet, a mere rippling of gentle sounds in delicate melodies. But it could not be quenched, it could not be quenched, and it took to itself power and profundity. The other, this is the loud theme, had now achieved a unity of its own, but it was loud and vain and endlessly repeated, and it had little harmony, but rather a clamorous unison. It essayed to drown the other music by violence of its voice, but its most triumphant notes were taken by the other and woven into its solemn pattern. So the more that evil tried to prevail, the more it found itself actually becoming weaker, or actually giving more strength to goodness. It's kind of like the worse that the times are, the more good that there can possibly arise out of it. Anyway, that's actually unrelated to everything that I'm talking about, but I just had to go through it. So in the Grey Annals, the only thing of note that I am now looking back with fresh eyes, having read everything and just seeing what's interesting, because the thing about a second read through is that the first time you're just more interested in like what happens next, you just want to know. And the second time I'm thinking, as I'm reading through this, like, what would it have been like truly to be there? What would it have been like to split off as with Denethor and come around and find Doriath? What would it have been like for those elves? And it's just been a very interesting read. One book I will say that I've really enjoyed unexpectedly is, and it's not even in the whole series here that is behind me, but The Nature of Middle-earth is literally like an encyclopedia of all the little details that you just really want to know. Look, I'll even read to you the subtitle. It's such a turn on. Late Writings on the Lands, Inhabitants and Metaphysics of Middle-earth. Isn't that just great? Anyway, we'll be coming back to this, but it's really just like, I do want to know what the land looks like in all these places. And I hope that I can find that in here. So the Grey Annals is really kind of like similar to the Silmarillion, but it's more from the point of view of just what happens in Beleriand, and so it doesn't have any of the Valinor stuff with the Ainur and none of the Noldor stuff that happens over there either. So from the waking on Cuivianen in the year 1050 in a Vanya year, up until the year 1250, which is 2,000 years, solar years, because if each That's 200 years. Vanya years? It's not Vanya years, that's the name of the elves. It is Valian years or Valian years. I'm going to say Valian years. So 1 solar year, 1 Valian years is 10 solar years. So 200 years is 2,000 years from the waking of Cuivianen to when dwarves come across Thingol. But before we get there, and I probably already talked about this, but I really just absolutely cannot get past this amazing line, which is, "Thus began the love of Elwë Greymantle and Melian of Valinor. Hand in hand they stood silent in the woods, while the wheeling stars measured many years." That is a very amazing way to write that, because it's such a passive voice. It's like these two saw each other and couldn't move because of love. And they can't even measure time themselves because they are so caught up in each other that the only thing that can measure time is the stars above them. And it's just like the way that it's passively written just makes it feel like they're so helpless to just love each other, and it's just beautiful. As much as I'm not the biggest fan of love at first sight, and I just find it a little bit boring isn't the word, but just not as interesting as it could be, I do think that was a very beautiful line. Reading back on this, now that I know like all the stuff that's happened, I will say that it's really sad that Finwë basically, so Elwë, who, you know, got stuck in this forest, like Finwë really liked him and they were really good buds. And I just feel like it was such a lost opportunity for Feanor to not get along with Elwë. I don't even think there was a chance they could have met though, because Feanor arrived and died pretty damn quickly, and we'll get to that later. But it is just a shame that the son of Finwë didn't meet, and none of the sons of Finwë, only the grandsons of Finwë ended up meeting Thingol. So it's just, I think that's just really sad. Also, the most hypocritical thing in the world is Elwë. I don't know whether to call him Elwë or Thingol. I think I'm just going to call him Thingol because there's so many ways of the elves. There's too many ways, okay? So he basically, all these people lost sight of him because he was just, for I think maybe like 100 years or something like that, he was just in love, standing in the middle of a forest. But when Luthien falls in love with Beren, and vice versa, he just doesn't allow that. He doesn't accept that, despite basically falling in love at first sight and half abandoning his people because of that. You know? I mean, he didn't abandon them on purpose, but he caused a lot of issue because a lot of them stayed back for him, right? Looking for him. And I think at one point they called themselves like the Forsaken Ones, because they were like, well, our king is gone and so we can't leave, but also staying here, we can't find him. But he does wake up at some point, and then he's described as the tallest of all the children of Iluvatar, which I just find endlessly funny because he wasn't described as the tallest before he found Melian in the forest, only after, which implies that he grew over that period of time, which is just so funny. I don't know why I find that so funny. The trees are growing and he grows a little bit as well. Melian's like, look, you're perfect, but just a few more inches, that'll be perfect. Thingol's like, a few more inches of height, love, your height. The dwarves come over, and specifically they literally say this to Thingol. There are fell beasts in the land east of the mountains, and the dark elves that dwell there, your ancient kindred, are flying from the plains to the hills. Cool. Like, that's pretty bad. So Thingol, A, doesn't aid them, B, doesn't send to even think to like start sending people out to kill these beasts because eventually they'll come here. They do arm themselves, and the dwarves give them axes and spears and swords and tall helms and long coats of bright mail and hauberks, I think that's what you call it, that were so fashioned that they rusted not and shone ever as were they new burnished. Okay, so the dwarves, like, they arm themselves alongside the dwarves, and they're building Menegroth and everything like that, but don't go and help all these dark elves, which I find so tragic, because one of those dark elves it is Denethor, and this is honestly Denethor and like a few others that die, like Argon, and then the two other A brothers that were sons of Finarfin, who I'll remember in a minute. They are called Angrod and Aegnor. It could be Aegnor. But they all die fighting, but it's just not as grand as some of the others, so I just feel really sad for them. But Denethor's death also just really, it just wasn't nice to read. I think. So Denethor split off from Lenwë. They were sundered really early on. My God, the best book for all of this, all of the travelings of people, is definitely this book. There is one particular page that just shows the three hosts of the elves coming across and all of the different sunderings. And one of them is the Nandor splitting off and going south and deciding not to cross the Misty, the Misty Mountains. And that is Lenwë's crew. Is it Lenwë or Linwë? Anyway, his son is Denethor, and Denethor split off from him as well, and actually then circled south of the Misty Mountains and came up around then to go over the Blue Mountains, because, okay, the way that I think about it is you've got Misty Mountains, Blue Mountains, and then the ocean past that. But Denethor comes over, and he would have been at the time struggling because he's trying to fight off all these fell beasts, but eventually makes it over and becomes really good friends with everyone in Doriath, with Thingol, which is lovely. But the very first battle that Morgoth, I don't know what this battle is called. The very first battle that of host of orcs that Morgoth sends down. So all this time, eventually Morgoth is released. Feanor makes the Silmarils. Morgoth steals them, comes over, and the first battle, as he sends orcs down, they're not really prepared for, so a lot of elves die, including Denethor, who I just find it really frustrating because Denethor came to the aid of Thingol, despite definitely probably being worse armed and worse prepared, and he was the one that died. I think that's the tragedy of it. Like, these were the roaming elves who were just getting hammered over the east of the Blue Mountains, came, and they weren't protected and as prepared because they weren't as well armed from the dwarves, I imagine. They may have had some dealings, but then they beat the orcs, but at such a dear cost that so many of them would have died. And look, here's the funny thing is that all those ones that have died are probably now in Valinor, because none of these elves have done anything wrong by abandoning Valinor and following Feanor and Fingolfin. So I'm assuming they all woke up pretty quickly over in Valinor. And then it's after that point that Melian puts out her girdle borders. And this whole time, it's really fascinating because I can't remember basically, because the question is, why don't all of the Valar come over and help fight Morgoth? Well, they didn't do it because they were like, well, we're abandoning the Noldor because you guys just made a bad decision, so you're on your own. But there was a huge period of time beforehand where all the other Teleri elves, the Morroquendi who never came over, they've not done anything wrong. So, but they weren't given any help at all. Not that, you need help, but it just seems like they kind of got caught up in the fact that, like, the Sindar didn't do anything wrong. All they did was just accidentally be in the wrong spot at the wrong time, because that's exactly where the Noldor were coming. And that's like the Noldor brought with them the war with Morgoth and just decided to have it in Beleriand. And the Sindar were already there just chilling. So it just seems so unfair to the Sindar because they got caught up in this war, but still the Valar would not come to aid even them, right? It says at the end of chapter 10, none in Middle-earth, neither Morgoth nor Melian, heard news that came out of Aman, whether by messenger or spirit or by vision and dream. So they couldn't even have visions and dreams about Valinor anymore after the death of the trees. So even though the Sindar did nothing wrong, completely innocent, they still get cut off from all messages because of Feanor. I don't want to say because of Feanor, because the Valar didn't have to cut them off because of Feanor. It was like collateral damage, and it annoys me. The next bit is the return of the Noldor, which is where shit starts to happen. There is an elf called Daeron, who is the law master of the kingdom of Thingol. So instantly the most interesting person of the Sindar. Anyway, so he made runes, which I guess gives him a lot in common with Feanor, who also developed a language system or syntax, right? Written word. Feanorian script or whatever it is, Tengwar. This I know because I wrote it on my mirror when I did a Lord of the Rings hunt for my friends. And I was like looking up Feanorian script to write it so I could write the rules of the hunt game that I did. People were not amused. It looked very pretty though. Don't you love it when you're reading and you just come across like such a truth that just hits you? This is one of them. As works fair and wonderful, while still they endure for eyes to see, are their own record, and only when they are in peril or broken forever do they pass into song. I think I need to write that down somewhere to remind myself to live in the moment. Because, you just don't record these little beautiful moments day to day in your life. So there's barely any record, essentially, of all this stuff. All of these really good 2,000 years. About 2,000 years from the sundering of the elves to the coming of the Noldor. Or at least, I should say, bad stuff started to happen when Morgoth came back over. The other fell beasts that were roaming around and picking off little bands of the Nandor would have just been, I'm going to say, just randoms left over that didn't quite get all killed off in the battle previously, that would have come out of Utumno. And somewhere here is Sauron, who doesn't get mentioned for a really long time. And it's just such a fascinating idea that he's just like chilling for 2,000 years waiting for Morgoth. I've probably talked about this before, but I still can't get over that. Anyway, so the next thing that we're reading is going to be the coming of the Noldor, coming back. And also, I have already started reading Lord of the Rings, so I think I'm going to try and read them in tandem because that feels like the most fun way to do it. So I'll see you next time.